All right, so we're diving into fuzzy logic, and you've given us some excerpts from the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy on this.
Yeah.
And wow, even for
Yeah.
me, as someone who loves philosophy,
Yeah.
this is dense.
It's a very challenging area.
It is.
Even for, philosophers who spend all their time thinking about truth and reality and all that good stuff. But
Right.
that's part of what makes it so fascinating.
It is.
Yeah.
So for our listeners, who are already pretty familiar with philosophical thinking, let's really try to unpack this.
Yes.
In a way that gets at the core of what fuzzy logic means for our understanding of, well, everything.
Absolutely. And I think at its core, what fuzzy logic does is it really challenges one of the fundamental assumptions of classical logic.
Yeah.
And that is that everything is either true or false.
Right.
Fuzzy logic says, hold on a second, the world isn't always so black and white.
Okay.
It embraces the gray areas, the vagueness, the uncertainty that's inherent in so much of human experience and language.
It's like it's finally acknowledging that there's a spectrum. Instead of just saying this apple is red or this apple's not red.
Right.
It's like, well, this apple is kind of reddish or it's more red than it is orange.
Exactly.
Fuzzy logic gives us the tools to express those shades of meaning.
Precisely. And it does so in a mathematically rigorous way, which is what I think makes it so intriguing from a philosophical standpoint.
Yeah.
It's not just about saying, oh, everything is relative.
Right.
It's about developing a system that allows us to reason about vagueness and uncertainty in a precise and systematic way.
That's what I think is so exciting about it. And it's like this bridge between this intuitive way we use language and the formal structures of logic.
Absolutely.
But let's get into specifics here. The Stanford Encyclopedia entry mentions these things called T-norms or triangular norms.
Right.
What are those, and why are they so crucial in fuzzy logic?
So T-norms are really the building blocks of fuzzy logic.
Okay.
And they define how logical connectives like and or and implies operate when we're dealing with degrees of truth rather than absolute truth or falsehood.
Okay.
And different T-norms give rise to different flavors of fuzzy logic, each with its own unique properties and implications for how we reason.
So it's not just one monolithic fuzzy logic. There's a whole family of fuzzy logics, each defined by a specific T-norm.
That's right.
Wow, that's fascinating. The entry mentions three prominent ones.
Yeah.
Minimum product and Ukasievich.
Uh-huh.
Can we break those down a bit?
Absolutely. So let's start with the minimum T-norm, which is the simplest.
Okay.
And imagine you have two statements. This apple is red and this apple is sweet, each with a degree of truth between 0 and 1.
Okay.
The minimum T-norm says the truth value of this apple is red and sweet is simply the lower of the two individual truth values.
Okay.
So if red is 0.8 and sweet is 0.6,
Okay.
then red and sweet would be 0.6.
Okay, it's like a bottleneck.
That's a great way to put it.
It can only be as strong as its weakest link.
Right.
But what about the product T-norm? How does that differ?
So the product T-norm is a bit more nuanced. It takes the product of the two truth values,
Okay.
which generally results in a lower overall truth value than the minimum.
Okay.
And this aligns more closely with how we think about probabilities.
Okay.
So if there's an 80% chance of rain and a 60% chance of wind, the probability of both rain and wind is lower, right?
Yeah.
You multiply those probabilities together.
Makes sense. It's a more conservative approach to combining truth values.
Exactly.
And what about this Ukasievich T-norm? It sounds like it might be the most exotic of the bunch.
Yeah, the Ukasievich T-norm has some unique properties that make it particularly interesting from a philosophical perspective.
Okay.
One key feature is its continuous implication connective.
Okay.
In simpler terms, it means that small changes in the truth values of the statements involved
Yeah.
lead to proportionally small changes in the truth value of the implication itself.
Okay, I'm trying to wrap my head around that. Can you give us an example of why that continuity matters? Especially for a philosopher grappling with these concepts.
Certainly. So let's go back to our apple example.
Okay.
Imagine we have the statement, if this apple is red, then it is ripe.
Okay.
Now let's say the redness of the apple gradually fades, so its truth value for red slowly decreases.
Okay.
In Ukasievich logic, the truth value of the entire implication, if red then ripe,
Okay.
would also decrease, gradually reflecting the continuous change in redness.
Ah, I see. So it's a smoother, more intuitive transition
Exactly.
than we'd see in classical logic, where a slight change in redness might suddenly flip the entire implication from true to false.
Right.
Yeah.
That continuity avoids some of the jarring paradoxical jumps we encounter in classical logic when we try
Right.
to model vague concepts.
Like the classic Socrates paradox.
Exact, the one with the heap of sand.
Right, where you remove one grain of sand at a time,
Right.
and we're trying to pinpoint the exact moment it ceases to be a heap.
Exactly.
Classical logic demands a sharp boundary, but that boundary just seems arbitrary and ultimately untenable.
Precisely fuzzy logic, particularly with a T-norm like Ukasiewicz,
Okay.
allows for a more nuanced approach.
Okay.
The truth value of this is a heap gradually diminishes as we remove grains,
Right.
mirroring the inherent vagueness of the concept heap.
It's like saying that heapness fades out,
Right.
rather than abruptly disappearing. Fuzzy logic provides a way to represent that gradual change.
Exactly.
This feels like a game changer for philosophers who have been wrestling with this problem of vagueness for centuries.
It certainly offers a new perspective on these age-old philosophical dilemmas.
Yeah.
But fuzzy logic goes even further.
Okay.
It doesn't just deal with simple propositions like this apple is red.
Right.
It extends to predicates and quantifiers,
Okay.
allowing us to reason about all or some objects in a fuzzy way.
Okay. Now we're really getting into the philosophical meat of things.
Okay.
But before we delve into those fuzzy predicates and quantifiers,
Right.
let's give our listener a moment to process this foundational understanding of T-norms
Yes.
and their significance in shaping different fuzzy logics. It's crucial to grasp those building blocks before we construct even more complex fuzzy structures.
Right.
Yeah.
That's a great point. Okay, so now that we've got those T-norms, those building blocks,
Right.
let's dive a little bit deeper into how fuzzy logic tackles predicates and quantifiers.
Okay.
And this is where it gets really interesting for philosophers, I think, because we're really starting to challenge some fundamental assumptions about language and reasoning.
Okay, I'm ready for the challenge.
Sure.
So remind me, for those of us who might be a bit rusty on their logic terminology, what are predicates and quantifiers again?
Yeah, so a predicate is basically a property or characteristic
Okay.
that we can attribute to an object like red, tall, happy, philosophical.
Okay.
They describe qualities or states of being. Quantifiers, on the other hand, tell us how many objects possess that particular predicate.
Okay.
So words like all, some, most, none.
Right.
These are the quantifiers that shape the scope of our statements.
All right, so all ravens are black uses the quantifier all along with the predicates, raven and black. It's a universal claim asserting that every single member of the set of ravens possesses the property of blackness.
Right.
But as we all know, even seemingly simple statements like that can get pretty tricky when we encounter real-world complexities.
Exactly. And that's where fuzzy logic comes in. It offers more nuanced and flexible way to handle those complexities.
Okay.
So instead of being forced to say all ravens are black,
Right.
which might stumble over a few albino exceptions,
Right.
we can use fuzzy logic to express something like most ravens are highly black,
Okay.
or there's a significant degree of blackness associated with ravenhood.
Okay, so we're moving away from that absolute all-or-nothing claims of classical logic, and we're embracing this more graded, fuzzy approach.
Precisely.
But how do we actually formalize that mathematically? How do these fuzzy predicates and quantifiers actually work in practice?
Well, one way to think about it is that fuzzy predicates are basically functions that assign a degree of truth between 0 and 1 to each object in a given domain.
Okay,
So instead of saying this raven is black or this raven is not black,
right.
we might say this raven has a blackness degree of 0.9,
Okay.
or this raven has a blackness degree of 0.2,
Yeah.
reflecting variations in shade hue, or even the presence of a few stray white feathers.
It's like we're mapping out a spectrum of blackness, rather than just dividing ravens into these two stark categories.
It's a great way to think about it.
But what about those fuzzy quantifiers? How do we deal with most or few when truth itself is fuzzy?
Yeah, that's where things get even more interesting. The interpretation of fuzzy quantifiers actually depends on the specific fuzzy logic we choose,
Okay.
the T-norm that underlies our system.
Okay.
Different T-norms will give us different ways to calculate the truth value of statements involving fuzzy quantifiers.
So the choice of T-norm influences not just how we combine these basic propositions, but also how we interpret the very scope and meaning of quantifiers.
Exactly.
It's like each T-norm creates a slightly different fuzzy universe
It does.
with its own unique set of logical rules.
It's a great analogy.
So for instance, you were saying in some fuzzy logics, most might be interpreted as significantly more than half, while in others it might mean a very high proportion.
Right.
The exact definition depends on the mathematical underpinnings of the specific fuzzy logic we're using.
Precisely.
This raises a huge question for philosophers. What are the implications of these different fuzzy logics for our understanding of truth and meaning and the very nature of language?
Yeah.
If the meaning of most itself can shift depending on the chosen T-norm, doesn't that make truth relative or even arbitrary?
That's a profound question, and one that fuzzy logic forces us to confront. I mean, it really challenges that classical view of truth as absolute and unchanging.
Right.
Fuzzy logic suggests that truth might be contextual fluid,
Yeah.
and even dependent on the particular logical framework we choose to employ.
It's a radical departure from the traditional view of logic as purely objective and universal. Are we saying that there's no such thing as objective truth, that everything is ultimately subjective and relative?
Not necessarily. I mean, fuzzy logic doesn't deny the existence of an external reality.
Okay.
What it does is it acknowledges that our language, our concepts, and
Yeah.
even our methods of reasoning
Right.
are inherently imprecise, vague,
Yeah.
and subject to interpretation.
So it's not that the world itself is fuzzy,
Right.
but rather our tools for describing and understanding that world are fuzzy.
That's a great way to put it.
It's like we're finally acknowledging the inherent limitations of our cognitive and linguistic frameworks.
Exactly. Fuzzy logic isn't about saying anything goes.
Right.
It's about developing a more sophisticated and nuanced way to represent and reason about the inherent vagueness and uncertainty that permeates our experience.
Okay, this reminds me of something we touched upon earlier, this idea of algebraic semantics.
Yeah.
The Stanford Encyclopedia entry suggests that this approach provides a way to study fuzzy logic using these abstract algebraic structures.
Right.
It sounds incredibly complex, but could you try to give us a sense of what it means and why it's important?
Of course. So in essence, what algebraic semantics does is it gives us a way to generalize the ideas of fuzzy logic,
Okay,
to move beyond the specific numbers between 0 and 1,
right.
and to think about those truth values as elements of an abstract set.
Okay.
And we can define operations on that set that mirror the behavior of our logical connectives, like and, or, and implies.
So it's like creating a blueprint for fuzzy logic that can be applied to different contexts and situations.
Exactly.
Instead of being tied to these specific numerical truth values,
Yeah.
we're developing this more general and adaptable framework.
Precisely. And one such structure that they mention in the entry is called an MTL algebra, which stands for monoidal T-norm-based logic.
MTL algebras, now that's a mouthful.
It is a mouthful.
But are you saying that these abstract structures help us understand how different fuzzy logics work, how they relate to each other, and perhaps even how they might connect to other areas of mathematics or philosophy?
That's precisely the power of algebraic semantics. It allows us to study fuzzy logic from this more abstract and general perspective,
Yeah.
revealing underlying patterns and connections that might not be apparent when we're focused on specific numerical values.
It's like we're zooming out, getting this bird's eye view of the entire fuzzy logic landscape,
Right,
rather than just examining these individual trees.
right.
But before we get lost in this abstract wilderness of MTL algebras,
Yeah.
let's take a moment to ground this discussion back in the real world.
Okay.
Our listener might be wondering, okay, this is all very interesting from a theoretical standpoint,
Right.
but what are the practical applications of fuzzy logic? How does it impact our lives?
That's a great question. It's the one that I always have in the back of my mind when we're talking about these, abstract realms of logic and math. Like,
How does it all connect back to the messy, fuzzy reality we live in?
right.
Where does fuzzy logic actually make a difference?
Yeah, that's a crucial question. And it's one that fuzzy logic has actually answered in surprisingly practical ways.
Okay.
I mean, you probably interact with fuzzy logic more often than you realize, especially in the realm of technology.
Really? I gotta say, I usually associate fuzzy logic with, these big philosophical debates about truth and vagueness and things like that.
Yeah.
You're saying it has real-world applications beyond, just the world of ideas.
Absolutely. Fuzzy logic is really good at handling situations where you need to control systems or make decisions
Okay.
based on imprecise or incomplete information.
Okay.
It's particularly good at handling those gray areas that classical logic really struggles with.
Okay, so give me some concrete examples. Where does this fuzzy logic magic actually happen in our everyday lives?
Sure. Well, think about something like an anti-lock braking system in a car.
Okay.
It needs to react to constantly changing road conditions, tire grip driver input.
Mhm.
Fuzzy logic allows the system to make smooth adjustments
Okay.
based on those fuzzy variables, preventing the wheels from locking up and maintaining optimal braking performance.
Oh, that makes sense. So it's not about, making a binary brake or don't brake decision.
Right.
It's about modulating the braking force based on this continuous spectrum of inputs.
Exactly.
And fuzzy logic provides that flexibility.
Precisely. Another classic example is in washing machines.
Okay.
Fuzzy logic-based controllers can adjust the washing cycle based on things like load size fabric type and DOT level,
Right.
resulting in cleaner clothes and more efficient water and energy use.
So fuzzy logic is helping us do laundry better.
It is.
That's a far cry from the Sorites paradox.
It is, but I see the connection.
Yeah.
It's about taking those everyday, often vague variables
Right.
and using them to optimize a process.
Exactly. And the applications go far beyond just appliances. I mean, you see
Yeah.
fuzzy logic in everything from medical diagnosis and treatment planning to financial forecasting and stock market analysis.
Yeah.
I mean, it's even playing a role in the development of AI,
Absolutely.
helping machines reason more like humans do with, flexibility and adaptability.
That's right.
It's amazing to think that this concept, which really, came out of these deep philosophical questions
Right.
about the limits of language and logic, has now found its way into so many aspects of our technological world.
It really is. It's a testament to the power of abstract thinking to shape concrete realities.
Yeah.
But fuzzy logic's relevance extends beyond just practical applications.
Okay.
It also offers us new ways to think about the nature of truth, meaning, and reasoning itself.
Which brings us back to those alternative semantics we were talking about earlier.
Right.
Voting semantics and game theoretic semantics.
Exactly.
These approaches provide different ways to really ground fuzzy logic, to understand where those fuzzy truth values and connectives come from.
They do. Let's start with voting semantics.
Okay.
Imagine a group of people voting on whether a statement is true, and each person might have a different level of confidence or certainty in their vote.
Right.
We can think of the proportion of people who accept the statement as true as a kind of fuzzy truth value.
So if everyone votes, yes, it's totally true. If
Yeah.
everyone votes no, it's totally false.
Exactly.
But what about those in-between cases, those fuzzy ones?
Right. Well, that's where the voting mechanism comes in.
Okay.
Different voting systems might give more weight to certain votes
Okay.
or impose specific constraints on how the votes combine.
Okay.
And it turns out that under certain conditions,
Yeah.
those voting procedures naturally lead to the familiar truth functions of fuzzy logic, like minimum, maximum, and 1 minus x.
So the collective wisdom, or maybe the collective uncertainty of the crowd, gives rise to fuzzy logic.
That's a fascinating way to put it.
That is fascinating. But
Quickly.
what about game theoretic semantics? How does that fit into all of this?
So game theoretic semantics was developed by Robin Giles.
Okay.
And it frames logic in terms of a game between two players who are making assertions about statements.
Okay.
They break down complex statements into simpler ones according to rules that mirror the behavior of logical connectives.
Okay.
And the goal is to make assertions that are likely to be true based on, probabilities of those statements holding in reality.
So it's like a logic game where the players are betting on the truth of their assertion.
That's a great way to think about it. And the fascinating thing is that optimal strategies in this game correspond to truth values in Yukasevich logic,
Wow.
one of the prominent fuzzy logics we discussed earlier.
Yeah.
So a statement is considered valid in Yukasevich logic if and only if a player has a strategy that guarantees that they won't lose in this game no matter what the truth probabilities of the basic statements are.
Wow, that's a mind-blowing connection. It's
Oh.
like fuzzy truth values emerge from strategic decision-making in the face of uncertainty.
It highlights the deep connections between logic, probability, and game theory. It suggests that logical principles might actually be grounded in our strategic interactions with the world and with each other.
This has been an incredible journey through the world of fuzzy logic. We've gone from the basic concepts to the philosophical foundations,
Yeah,
explored its practical applications,
right.
even delved into these fascinating semantic models.
Absolutely.
It's clear that fuzzy logic is so much more than just a mathematical curiosity.
Yeah.
It's this powerful tool for understanding the complexities of human reasoning language and decision-making in a world that's rarely black and white.
Fuzzy logic reminds us that embracing uncertainty and vagueness isn't about abandoning reason or logic.
Right.
It's about developing more sophisticated and nuanced systems of thought that reflect the richness and complexity of our lived experience.
Well said. And for our listener who's now equipped with, I think, a much deeper understanding of fuzzy logic, I encourage you to continue exploring this fascinating realm.
Absolutely.
See how it might challenge your own assumptions about truth, meaning, and the way the world works.
Yeah.
You might just find that fuzzy logic offers this surprisingly clear perspective on the complexities of existence.
I think so too. Keep those minds flexible, those thoughts fuzzy, and keep exploring the boundless world of ideas.